It's Mathel here once again, and this is the final video I'm going to make for the Slayer Blade Vortex life-based, all kinds of shenanigans character that basically was designed to become just a max AoE character as a novelty to scale our Herald of Ice Gloom version as much as humanly possible. It turned into a pretty nice character. I would say, ultimately though, still just a bit worse for my liking than the Assassin version, because you can get a lot more DPS out of the Assassin version, and you don't really lose too much from not being duelist. There's a few different perks, so it's up to you which one you'd rather. Ultimately, I think if you're going to map more than this version, once the bugs get fixed for FPS with Headsman. But if you want to also take on Uber and do the hardest of the hard bosses really easily, then you probably want to be Assassin. As you can see though, this character did end up taking down every single boss in the game. Never tried Core Malachi, however, but the Uber run that I went ahead and did was actually quite tough. And here we have a test of me just turning on RF, and that's through Enfeeble, and as you can see, the leech isn't that great because I think it was a minus max or a minus regen map, and likewise here a vulnerability map with 6 bosses. I turn on RF and shit hits the fan, but somehow managed to get away with a kill. Long story short, I don't think RF is at all worth it in this build, basically ever. You can sustain RF with your leech when there's no bad mods, but that's really hard to do. It's more of a novelty as well if you ever want to try it out. In any case, I was saying, the build does take down everything in the game, but the hardest of the hard bosses do get pretty hard for this character. You're kind of squishy, you don't have Val Pact, and the damage just isn't there to be completely one-shotting everything. So for some bosses, you're going to get through just by one-shotting them, or, winding up your 50 stacks and insta-killing them. Some you may have to do a bit of dodging, and that's just kind of against the Blade Vortex lifestyle and playstyle that you might get used to with a low life or an assassin version of the build. So, as you can see, took down pretty much every boss. Then I went into Uber Atziri, and I had to change up my philosophy just a bit for how I tackle this fight. Basically, it's because I have built this character around being able to wind up, say, 30 stacks off of the back of my ES without any regeneration. But that means I can't wind up 50 stacks without my Vile Clarity, because Vile Clarity is what lets me wind up my 50 before I attack any serious bosses or serious trash mobs. And I don't really get to do that very often for a lot of the trash on Atziri or a lot of the bosses. Or, namely, Atziri herself. You'll have to carry several Val Clarities to be able to do that, and I only had 2, and that still wasn't good enough. And also, as you can see, the FPS lag gets really bad with that headsman bug, because you're doing so much hitting against such high life targets that they survive long enough and you get lots of hits in, thus causing the FPS lag, or bug, a lot more than you'd normally get against regular monsters, which die immediately. The double vials weren't much of a problem for this build at all. I seemed to have the perfect amount of DPS to down them before they even went down, and even when they came up, I think I should be able to take them on pretty comfortably. Just because I've got a lot of life regen, I can whirl or shield charge in and out quite comfortably, and I do have a life flask to instantly heal up. I don't think they'd be a problem if it came to having to deal with them. The Uber trio, however, were somewhat of a different story. It was a little bit challenging, mostly because if the dual striker put up his Flaming Thorns move, and I touched any part of that, I would instantly die. So I had to play it somewhat carefully by not being anywhere near him, and it kind of wasted a lot of my time, DPS time, on the first ad, and it can get kind of iffy. It actually went rather well there, but it is a weird fight, considering I don't insta-kill anything, and I don't have Vile Pact, meaning without the Vile Pact, then getting the kill without touching the dual striker while he's up in his reflect mode is kind of RNG based. Sometimes it'll be really good, sometimes it'll be really bad. And likewise, as you can see, since I can't keep casting, after the Vile Clarity wears off, that is, I start to run out of stacks if the fight lasts too long, and that one I had to do a lot of dodging on, and I never got a chance to stand still and regen my ES, so I ended up running out of stacks, running out of DPS, and just dying. I've ended up fixing that by wearing the Zealot's Oath Flask, which does let me sustain a lot better during a fight. At least whenever it's up, it'll definitely work. So that forces me to get rid of the Atziri Flask, which is a large chunk of DPS, and also play just a bit differently. But then the real problems start for this character. So as you can see, I have no mana regen or ES regen without the Zealot's Oath Flask. So based off of the initial amount that I actually have, I can get about 30 stacks in. And since I can't straight up insta-kill one of these adds, I have to start out by baiting the first Flame Blast. I died there because I got crit by a spear since I had Assassin's Mark up, by the way. So what I have to do is first bait a Flame Blast by standing out to the side, letting her drop it, and then charging in straight onto the spear ad to try and kill her before she does anything, and it takes me about a second or two. So if I don't get a good amount of stacks and DPS on that spear ad, she'll either spear me a couple of times or I'll get hit by the second Flame Blast without dodging. Which makes this kind of a tricky fight. I end up doing 2 runs cleanly, my first 2 runs, and by cleanly I mean finishing, and then I bricked a third run because I died to trash like 2 or 3 times, and I was playing pretty badly, and then Atziri herself was just a bit too tough in the end. But as you can see, with the phase in between, I'm attacking by trying to keep up as many stacks as possible and keeping up my power charges ready for the next phase. You want to always drop a Stibnite on top of Atziri whenever you're attacking her, so her spears don't really hit you that well. And hopefully you can pop a Vile Clarity and a Vile Haste, get to 50 stacks, and carry over your DPS to be able to insta-kill the adds like that. That is the dream scenario, and it can work out that way. It just didn't for me most of the time, and that's why I had a bit of trouble taking down Uber Atziri. And likewise, just then, what you saw was getting stunned during shield charge. It's a problem that Whirling Blades doesn't have, but shield charge does, and I found out quite evidently in the middle of that spear. Turns out, while you're charging, if you get hit, you can get stunned. That doesn't happen with Whirling Blades, and it's pretty fucking game-changing for you there, because I got stunned and then flame blasted, and things just went badly from there. But if you can get back in and dodge the first flame blast, get back on top of her, kill her with your 30-40 stacks or so, then you can cull her pretty easily for the last 20%. So I'll go over real quick what ended up happening with the character. He ended up hitting level 90, about 5300 life, with a few subpar life items like that, this. That's actually not too bad for life. And that. So you can ultimately hit about 5500 life if you're doing good there, and if you take a few other life nodes. But what I did was run Vinctor, and to be able to run Vinctor, you have to pretty much drop your Quicksilver and keep a life flask on hand. Now, that wasn't ideal for mapping most of the time, so I'd still use a Quicksilver. And of course, after the Stibnite here, I needed a Diamond Flask too. I just had to pillage a bit of the character. So you kind of stress to put in all the flasks you want. You either lose an Atziri Flask, or the Vinctor, or a Life Flask, or a Quicksilver Flask. Because the Stibnite's absolutely crucial, and I think the Diamond Flask is absolutely crucial too. But besides that, yeah, not too much else changed for the character. To do Uber Atziri, I did set up an alternate Blade Vortex setup, which you just press every now and again. It lasts 8.75 seconds, and on that we have Assassin's Mark, Curse on hit, Power Charge on crit, and Blade Vortex. So that's just something you have to use every now and again in the midst of getting your normal 50 stacks or whatever. Make sure you get a couple of these stacks in, meaning if you usually charge up 50 before a boss, you have to save about 2 of those stacks for your alternate Blade Vortex. Aside from that, I don't think anything else changed. I carried an extra Vile Clarity on me for Uber Atziri just so I could charge up a second one for the Uber phase. And that's really it. Herald of Ice was no longer attached to anything, it was just used as an extra bit of damage because it doesn't really do much in such high life targets as Uber Atziri. As I said, this was the flask that I was using just to get Zealot's Oath during the flask effect, which allows you to cast just a little bit more from your Blade Vortex. No Zealot's Oath, no ES regen, you pop your Zealot's Oath, and all of a sudden you can pretty much sustain. As long as you keep that up right from the get-go, then you can sustain, especially when you run around every now and again. You get 3 uses out of it too. It does a bit of damage, and through flask nodes it is a bit more effective as well. So it's kind of a good choice to be able to sustain for certain fights like Uber Atziri, or even in general if you want to use it over another flask. It basically saves us 4 points, I think. 1, 2, 3, 4 for Zealot's Oath. Plus it actually gives you the ability to still regen on your life, because if you take Zealot's Oath, then you lose all your life regen, and that's why I didn't want to take it. All in all, the character was pretty fun. Ultimately, if I was going to play a Blade Vortex, it'd probably be Assassin, but this is certainly a choice for people if you want something different out of your character, and probably a bit more of a comfortable mapping experience. That's it for this character, guys. Thank you very much for watching. I'm Mathel, and I'll see you guys next time.